catalog tree. If you click that, I'll close mine. If you click that, it should open. Does anybody need to see that again? All right. So when you open it up, you're going to notice this looks just like any other program. Here on the left, again, is the catalog tree. So this is like the file navigation part. And here in the main window, we have three different tabs: Contents, Preview, and Description. So when we actually select some GIS data, this is where we'll get to preview it. But again, we need to first set up a connection to a folder where our data live. And there are a couple of different ways we can do it. First, there's this button here at the top on the left, a folder with a plus sign that says Connect to Folder. So if you click that, you're going to get a window where it's going to ask you to navigate to your data. And so all the data are in that D drive, Introduction to GIS folder, and then the data subfolder within that. So you want to navigate and then say OK. Oops. Computer. I go to the D drive, to Introduction to GIS, and say Data. And I'll say OK. OK. So we need to open ArcCatalog. We'll go here, All Programs, ArcGIS, and then open ArcCatalog. And that'll take a minute or so. Yeah, just say no and close out of that. Yep. So what you see on the left in the catalog tree is you should be able to expand this folder now and start navigating down, and you can explore these subfolders in data. So again, it works similar to Windows Explorer. And if I click on any of these folders, I see in the Contents tab just a quick list of what's actually in that folder. Yep, connect to folder, and then say Computer, and D, and scroll down to Introduction to GIS. Yep, and then say Data, and then say OK. And now you can expand that folder here once it catches up. All right. Okay, so if you, so if you, let's maximize this energy folder. You can see there are 7 or 8 different data sets living in that folder. And just by reading the names, I think you can sort of guess what they are, right? But if you actually click on any of those, here in the Contents tab, with some of these, you'll actually get a very small preview of what's living in that file. Right, so if you click on a folder, the Contents tab shows you what lives in that folder. If you click on, say, this RefWin no exclusions, you can actually get a snippet of what's in there. But let's click this Preview tab and see what comes up. So this is a pretty big data set. It's taking a minute to load here, but what do you see? What type of data is it? Is it vector or raster? Raster?
It's combination.
Well, this one's actually vector. Let's click on, this one's a little confusing, right? Because there are these big square vector, or polygons. Let's click on this onshore industrial wind turbines, right? This one's easy to spot. So this is raster or vector? Vector, right? And what kind of data is it? Points, right? So if you look at the actual icon here in my list, notice I have these 3 dots next to the name. So this is the symbol for point data. If you look at the pipelines, it has, I'm going to guess by looking at this icon, these are lines. Right? And so then if I go back to that wind layer and look at the symbol, that's actually the symbol for polygons. All right. So now let's go down, if you see this one that's called Clemson Topo 1951.tiff. Let's click on that and then take a look at the icon for that one. And then look at the data and see if you can make a guess. Is this vector or is this raster? Raster. You had a 50-50 chance, right? Now, so you can see by the extension .tiff, this is an image file. Well, I shouldn't say most. A lot of GIS raster data come directly from imagery. So they retain that file type, like a JPEG, PNG, or a TIFF. So the icon here, this grid, or I think it looks kind of like a waffle, that lets me know that this is a raster data set before I even open it. So now I want to show you a few tools you can use for navigating through your data. And these are the same for ArcCatalog and ArcMap. So here at the top, notice there's this magnifying glass with a plus sign. You know, my zoom in tool. So if I click that and then click and drag a box, I can start zooming in. And if I go further and further and further, you know, I can see each of those individual pixels, basically each cell in my grid. I can click the magnifying glass with the minus sign for the zoom out tool and reverse the process to zoom out. And I can zoom back in. There's a hand. This is the pan tool. So this is how you can move around in your data without zooming in or out. And then there's also a globe. If I can find my mouse. This is what's called the full extent view. So if you click that, it automatically fits your data in the frame. And I find the most useful tool is the pan tool, because when I have that selected, I can move my data around. But if I use the mouse wheel and pull it towards myself, I'll zoom in, and push it away, I'll zoom out. Right, so lots of different ways to navigate around the map. Okay, let's see. So going back to my presentation here, the data we've looked at so far have all had these green icons. And what this means is that they are individual files. Some terminology you're going to hear very often when you talk about GIS is shapefile. And a shapefile is a vector file type. So it's going to be points, lines, or polygons. You can also have these individual rasters like our topo map. So they might be an image or other grid format. Shapefiles were created, I believe, in the late 80s or in the 90s. GIS originally used something called a coverage, and then they restructured that into a shapefile because it worked better. Then maybe 10 or 15 years after that, they moved away from using the shapefile as a default and moved into this geodatabase model. So a geodatabase is essentially just a container that your data live in. When you view it in Windows Explorer, it looks like any other folder except it has a .gdb extension. But within a geodatabase, you can have different data that live together. If they are individual vector data sets, they're called a feature class, which is essentially just a shapefile that lives inside of a geodatabase. You can combine multiple feature classes together into what's called a feature data set. You can also store tables, topology and relationships, or individual raster files within a geodatabase. The advantage to a geodatabase, the first one, is there's no limit to the size of files you put in there. Shapefiles were written back when entire hard drives might be 2 gigabytes, and so that maximum file size for a shapefile seemed fine. But GIS data often get bigger than that, so a geodatabase allows you to have larger files. It also restructures the files to be better accessed by computers. Right? It's written more in a machine language than something humans can interpret. I'll show you an example of that in a few minutes. But it makes them process and render faster and enables more efficient querying of your data. So any questions about this? So generally what you'll see is data living in file geodatabases, or when you create data, you usually want to create it in a geodatabase to take advantage of things like having no limit to the size, better processing. So if I go back to Art Catalog, we've been looking in this energy folder to begin with, right? It has all these shape files within it. Notice there's also this thing called energy.gdb.